Good morning, everybody. I am Brian M. Hazard. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at HawkBlogger. And it is the morning after the Seahawks final preseason game, the first of the final preseason games of Mike Macdonald's new career as head coach of the Seahawks. And we have a very special HawkBlogger Mornings with the No Table. The No Table has made a return. Mitch Levy has licensed the No Table to HawkBlogger Mornings for the second time. Appearing with us today, Mitch Levy of Mitch Unfiltered. Mitch, how you doing?
Doing well. I'm going to the mailbox to see if I've licensed it. I haven't gotten any checks recently. But,
the check is in the mail, if you haven't heard that before. And it wouldn't be a No Table if there was just two of us sitting across from each other. It's got to be at least three. And we decided to bring Brady Henderson aboard. Brady Henderson of ESPN.com, the designated pool reporter who, was the dean of the press box yesterday. Great to see him in action. Brady, how you doing?
I'm good. I was really hoping we would get a pool report situation from the preseason just to kind of work out all the kinks before the games actually start counting.
Now, this is the type of information that really gets people going. But I am curious. What does a pool reporter do? Like, what would be your responsibilities if something like happened?
So being the pool reporter means you're the designated reporter to go talk to the game official, or I guess nowadays you're really doing it with, I think, Walt Anderson, the head of officiating in New York. So if there's a questionable officiating decision made throughout the game, with the pool reporter can contact the league and say, hey, I'd like to do a pool report on this. So you just talk to the official and they give you the official word on what went down. So it's just one person doing it as opposed to a bunch of reporters trying to talk to the guy.
Do you go into like a special room or something, or like?
I think you used to actually go down to the officials' locker room, I believe is how you used to do it. And then like a PR person would accompany you down there. But nowadays I did it once last year, and you basically just do it over the phone. It's a three-way call between an NFL official and then I think it's Walt Anderson, who's back at the league office.
So Mitch, you were one of the three of us who were not in attendance at the game last night. Is that correct?
I was not. No. I could tell you where I was if that would be.
Yeah, I would like to know.
No, I'm not going to tell you where I was. But you should know that the last time I was with you in person, I was in the same place with my wife watching it on television. Does that tell you where I was?
Where?
Does that tell you where I was?
That does help. That does.
Does that help you? And by the way, before you move on, when you say pool reporter, I think of Brady like without his shirt on, sunscreen, maybe a towel around his neck. But and by the way, for sure. What game? And I have one right in my mind. What game, Brian, in Seahawks history would it have been really interesting, maybe most interesting? To be the pool reporter, Brian.
Well, the game that comes to mind for me would be the Fail Mary. The Golden Tate touchdown.
Yes.
Is that the one you were thinking of?
That's the one I'm thinking of, Brady. If you were to go back in time, Brady, where would you like to be the pool reporter for a Seahawks game?
Well, that would have been a disaster because that was a Monday night game. Now, thankfully, I wasn't working for a newspaper at the time, so I didn't have to worry about a newspaper deadline. But that would have been a disaster. I didn't even know how that would have worked because those were replacement officials. The other one would have been Super Bowl 40, but that also would have been a disaster when you're trying to bang out Super Bowl stories and then having to go talk to officials and everything. But that's sort of what it's there for, is when there's a questionable officiating decision, there's a reporter who can actually talk to the official.
So where I was going with this, Mitch, because I have a bunch of questions for Brady, I'm sure you do as well, but you are the passionate pessimist. We've established this before. Yes. What was your take watching that game, watching the starters, the first series, obviously, and then watching the balance of that game? What was kind of your takeaway from that game?
I think when I learned who Cleveland was going to play and who Cleveland was not going to play, and when I learned who the Seahawks were going to play, at least in the first couple of series offensively, and who the Seahawks were not going to play, it felt to me like, as a passionate pessimist, I'll embrace the role that there was really nothing the Seahawks were going to be able to do that were going to send me to the Vegas casinos to purchase a Super Bowl bet. It felt to me like going into the game that the offense had to look sharp, rhythmic, had to move the ball for however many series it was going to be, because Cleveland's not going to play their first stringers on defense. It was like a no-win situation for the Seahawks offense for me because of who they were playing. They were either not going to look good, look lethargic, not move the ball, or they were going to move the ball great against backups. And so I would say they moved the ball great. They looked great. I'm not going to get too wildly excited about it. Myles Garrett wasn't there. The corner wasn't there. There were a lot of guys not there. But, yes, it's hard not to watch that first series and say, my goodness, look at DK. You've been saying all week or all camp, so has Brady been saying, the Geno to DK combination. It struck for a touchdown. Jackson Smith and Jigma made a nice play. Geno got away from pressure on one of the plays and dumped it off. I thought that might have been the most underrated play of that series, when he kind of gets away or extends the play and finds a running back. I think it might have been McIntosh for 8 or 10 or 12 yards or whatever it was. So, yes, hard not to be pleased. But that was my expectation, Brian, going in, knowing who was playing, who wasn't going to play. So I'm excited and waiting for the next chapter, I guess.
Brady, are you surprised that he didn't start with Jason Myers, a soliloquy to Jason Myers after that game?
You asked me, hold on a second. You asked me about the first series offensively.
I asked you for your takeaways, your reactions to the game, especially the first series. Yes.
It was Jason Myers' night. I'm wondering why you didn't start with Jason Myers and why you haven't petitioned the league to let the Seahawks kick extra points from 54 yards and longer for the remainder of the season.
See, that's where I thought you were going to end up, is that the first series was most impressive that they actually made the extra point. That's where I thought you were going to go. Yes. Brady, there was a lot of different storylines heading into this game, most of them kind of at the back end of the roster. Is it safe to assume that Anthony Bradford looks like from a starting positional battle that he's probably going to be the guy come week one? Is that your estimate?
It sure seems like it. Yeah, I mean, he started that game. He started, I believe he started all 3 preseason games at right guard, if I'm not mistaken. And he's really been in that spot for the vast majority of camp, save for what I think maybe one practice in Nashville last week, where they put Christian Haynes in that spot and Bradford was working with the twos. And then you saw Haynes play left guard the past couple of games. And to me, that looks like a sign that, Bradford is the guy at right guard, and that they're giving Haynes some reps on the left side, knowing that if he's going to be the primary backup, like you hear the swing tackle, who's the tackle on game day, who's the primary backup at both spots. Well, if you want to have a swing guard there, that guy's got to know both of those spots. Well, Haynes has only played on the right side for the most part. I think he made 48 college starts at UConn, and they were all at right guard. So if he's going to be that guy, if you feel like Bradford is the starter, and you want Haynes to be that primary backup at both spots, you've got to give him some snaps at left guard, because he hasn't had that many of those. So it's at this point, considering how often we've seen Bradford as the number one guy there, and considering the fact that Mike McDonald said, they want to make a decision quickly there, I would be pretty surprised if they all of a sudden name Christian Haynes the starter there.
Brady, I read everything you write on ESPN.com.
Thank
Ring
you.
the bell. And last night, Mitch, I'm leaving. I'm bleary-eyed. I'm still barely slept. It's like 12:30, and I see that Brady's published his 53-man roster projection.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he projects that they're going to keep like 70,000 receivers, I think is roughly the number I saw.
7.
7, I guess, is the accurate number. And you projected that they would add a guy that doesn't even exist on the 90-man roster right now. John Ridgeway was, I think, the name you said to keep an eye on from the Washington Commanders. Tell us a little bit about how you got to Eskridge making it and being the 7th receiver, and then this lead you think you've maybe got on John Ridgeway.
Oh, I can see the disappointment in Mitch Levy's face after hearing that I have Eskridge on the roster. Now, he was definitely the last guy on the roster, so he's the guy I feel least confident in.
He's the Joe Lunardi bubble team that just slips in to the college basketball tournament at the last minute, right? Yeah.
But believe it or not, I actually had him on the roster before the game, before he had that great 79-yard punt return for a touchdown. I'm not saying, again, these are projections on what you think the team will do, not necessarily what they should do or what I would do if I was making the call there. Look, return, I think ability is his ticket to making this team. We have not seen him make very many plays as a wide receiver. And in fact, guys like Aesop Winston, even Cody White, have vastly outperformed him at wide receiver. But I think Eskridge just provides that extra gear, that extra bit of athleticism that made him a second-round pick. And look, we got to realize who's making this decision, okay? It's John Schneider, the guy who spent a second-round pick on Eskridge. I think there's going to be incentive to give him one more shot. I also wonder, and I've never heard this is just purely me speculating, but, remember what happened with Rashad Penny. Remember how he finally went off after all those seasons of being injured and not really producing a whole lot. He finally went off and he sort of rewarded that patience. And I wonder if there's a thought in the back of John Schneider's mind that, hey, if you just stick with Eskridge for just a little bit longer, maybe he pops. Now, the difference, I know what you're going to say. You got your finger up and you're ready to rebut what I just said, Mitch.
No.
I know exactly what you're going to say, which is that with Penny, you saw more flashes, right? You saw he even when he was hurt, he had that insanely high yards per carry average, and you really just have not seen that with Eskridge, save for what I think he scored a touchdown as a rookie, and then he had that nice kickoff return last Thanksgiving against the 49ers. Aside from that, you really haven't seen it, but I think the return ability, remember, you're going to have two kickoff returners back there at once. So you need another guy who can do that. And you obviously saw what he can do with the ball in his hands as a punt returner.
Well, three things. And I want to turn it to Brian because as we all know, when we do these shows, Brian's playing moderator here. And I think a lot of people want to hear what Brian has to say. I want to even go back to the Bradford Haynes deal that we've talked about for a lot of months now. I want to hear what Brian thinks about that and the wide receiver situation. I would say three things as it pertains to Eskridge, and let me be a smart ass to begin with. If I really had sat down and thought about it pre-Saturday night's game, if Brady Henderson called me or played golf with me and he said, Mitch, what's going to happen on Saturday night? What's the Seahawks way? I mean, what's going to happen? If I really gave it some thought, I would have finally arrived at, what's going to happen? Eskridge is going to do something electric in the final after we've all written him off. He's going to do just something so spectacular that he's going to suck us back in to letting him putting him on the roster. And then, of course, what's going to happen? He's going to get hurt in the lead up to game one, and he'll be on the injured list for the rest of the year. That's probably the Seahawks way, and that's exactly what happened. My question to you guys is about this topic, and Brian, I'd like to hear what you have to say. You just really said that keeping Eskridge would be, Brady, kind of a non-wide receiver move. You'd be keeping him as an electric special teams type of performer for the most part.
Yeah.
And I know the kickoff situation has changed, but when you talk about Chenault, are we keeping two guys in Chenault and Eskridge that are really non-wide receivers because they do other things? Or do you really only want to keep one guy like that who's a non-wide receiver, wide receiver for other things?
I don't think Eskridge was – sorry, I don't know if that was directed at me or Brady, but I don't think that Eskridge was in competition with Chenault at this point. I think Chenault had secured himself not only as a returner, but – I think he's going to be a prominent part of the offense. I think he brings a unique skill set that the other guys don't. I think Eskridge was in competition with D. Williams. It was D versus D. And honestly, D. Williams did fine. He had a nice 16-yard punt return. Like, he is known to be a dynamic returner. I think the reason Brady could end up being right about Eskridge making this roster is Eskridge was a second-round pick and is going to be harder to get through waivers.
Yes.
And D. Williams, they can have them both. So you can have Eskridge and Williams, or you could potentially have only Williams. And so when you get in that situation, plus you've got the extra thing of John Schneider being the big cheese now, He's like, hey, this is a second-round pick. Creed Humphrey just signed a multi-trillion-dollar deal a few weeks ago. I'd like another shot before that book is closed. And Eskridge gave him an opportunity to make that decision. So I think all those reasons make it plausible that Brady is right about how that will play out.
But Brian, think about what you just said. You just said, I think. Now, Brady gets a pass because Brady just said he had him on the roster before Saturday night. Yeah. Right, Brady? Did you tell me that?
I did say that. Okay. Yeah. Not very confidently, but I did.
Okay. But did you have him on the roster before Saturday night, Brian?
I did not. I have D. Williams on the roster and D.
Eskridge. Are we really going to not have, or are we really going to put the guy on the roster? I mean, he had all credit to him. It was a beautiful play. It was a special type of play. We saw the Jets. Are we really changing our mind on a guy's roster position being cut or being on the roster based on one play in one preseason game, the third and final preseason game? Is that what we're doing?
If it's me,
yes.
No, I am not making that decision. Okay. I'm comfortable with D. Williams, 4 years under club control at undrafted free agent cost and moving on from D. Eskridge. Because the fact of the matter is, even if D. Eskridge has a positive season, he is not part of the long-term answer here in Seattle. He's just not. So I'm telling you what I think John Schneider and the coaching staff will potentially do. And it's not what I would do in this case. And I don't know that it's because of that one play. They have been excited about what D. Eskridge could provide throughout the offseason. And he gave them the validation. He gave them the public cover to continue the experiment. So that's kind of how I read it, as opposed to, oh, that one play got him on the roster.
And one more point I'll make on Eskridge, it sort of reminds me a little bit of the Jamal Adams in the sense that, you know, he's a guy that has not really ingratiated himself to the fan base just with all the injuries and the lack of production. And much like Adams, you saw that last week in Tennessee with how friendly Seahawks players still are for him. You can tell how well respected he still is in that organization. Look at the reaction among Seahawks teammates when D. Eskridge was coming off the field. You know, they picked the guy up and carried him off like he was Rudy. So as much as fans might be frustrated with Eskridge just because it's been one injury after another, I think it's pretty clear that his teammates like the guy. And you know, back to D. Williams, I think he's going to be with the organization, especially, you know, remember, he's a guy who's played cornerback and receiver. So got some versatility there. So I project him to be on the practice squad, but I think he's going to be with this team one way or another. And Mitch, by the way, that's D. Williams. That's not Billy D. Williams.
I got it.
The guy who played Lando Calrissian in Star Wars. It's D. Williams.
He also played Gale Sayers in Brian's song, the Brian Piccolo story, which you wouldn't know about because you're too young. Brian, before you put the Bradford Haynes thing to bed, I want to, because you and I have talked about how it would be a disappointment to Seahawks fans, of which Brady, of course, is not one.
Not one.
So he's out of this conversation. It would be a disappointment to Seahawks fans if Haynes didn't go out and win a starting job right out of the gate on the offensive line. If what Brady and you say is correct, and I don't have any reason to disagree with you, which is it looks like it's Bradford's job to start. Maybe we'll see a little rotation in there. Did Bradford go out and win it? Did Haynes not win it? And how do we feel as Seahawks fans, Brian, about opening day Bradford and no Haynes?
It's an excellent question. That's why you're the one that should be hosting these things more often. You know, I would say that Anthony Bradford started camp quite well. Actually, I thought like he looked like he was winning it. I remember specifically early on in 1v1s, him throwing Byron Murphy to the ground, like in a play that was just like, whoa. And there was some animosity there. He was like, I am here to prove that I am the alpha. And I was like, that's the energy we want, Anthony. So like, great, good for you. I think he's faded in the middle of camp, and then in the last week or so has steadied. And so I don't think he's done anything dynamic, but he also has the advantage of being a guy that's already played a year in the league and had a number of starts. So what you've got is Christian Haynes, who has been, I think, steadily improving, and some unevenness as a rookie is going to have in any position. But I don't think he's clearly overtaken Anthony Bradford. And Pete Carroll used to kind of talk about this semi rule of if you have a rookie and a veteran and they're roughly even heading into the season, you go with the rookie because you assume that they're going to eclipse them in development. Anthony Bradford's in his second year. It's hard to call him a veteran, but I think these two are roughly equivalent. And I think what you're going to see is the Seahawks are going to rotate these guys and they're going to keep the pressure on each of them to see who emerges. I don't think this competition's really over. I just think the competition for who starts in week 1 might be.
Okay. So you're saying if the competition is not over, Brady, if he's right, then we see Haynes for a couple of series, maybe a series a half or a series and a half, something like that. We're going to see him in there against the Broncos on September the 8th playing quality snaps.
Yeah, that is a good point that Brian makes there. I mean, the offensive line is obviously not a position where teams typically rotate. You know, you either typically you just stick with your starting 5 unless one of those guys gets hurt. But we have seen the Seahawks, obviously a different coaching staff. We have seen them kind of work offensive linemen in I think maybe in similar situations where it was 2 guys competing for a job. So yeah, the fact that, you know, if Anthony Bradford is indeed the guy and he wins that job, then yeah, I think we're still going to see Christian Haynes. It makes sense to play the guy. He's a rookie. And again, remember, there's been several, instances over the last few years where the scouting department spends a draft pick on a guy, wants him to play. Coaching staff doesn't do it. John Schneider never had any recourse because all those coaches always reported to Pete Carroll and not him. The coaches now report to John Schneider. So when they draft a guy, especially in the 3rd round, he's going to find the field.
Brady, I do want to get back before we move on to other things. This John Ridgeway thing.
Yeah, we never talked about that.
Yeah, like it's not the biggest story. Most people aren't going to be salivating over a backup nose tackle, but it was of note when I sat and looked at the depth chart the Seahawks PR staff handed out last night. Nose tackle was Jonathan Hankins, and second string was Cameron Young in parentheses because he's on PUP and nobody else behind him. So I'm guessing the Seahawks are looking at that, not feeling super comfortable going into the season. So say a little bit more about this.
Yeah, and John Ridgeway III from Washington, he's the guy that I've heard that they have been poking around on. I've heard that from a couple different people. And so if they're poking around on him, that makes me wonder if they're just looking at those big body defensive tackles in general, just to try to supplement the depth there. As you said, there's really not a whole lot behind Jonathan Hankins. And remember, Hankins is 32 and on a 1-year deal, and he's at a stage in his career where he needs kind of the veteran rest days every now and again. So I think the thought is if Hankins goes down, you don't really have another big bodied nose tackle behind that. Now, Jaron Reed has obviously played nose before. We even saw Byron Murphy do a little bit of it in college. So you have other guys who could fill that role, but they're really not that big body that Hankins is, and John Ridgeway is that. He's even bigger than Hankins, or at least he's taller. He's, I think, 6'5" and over 320 pounds. So maybe not like traditionally built nose tackle because he's a little bit longer, but he's got the size to play that spot, and he has done that quite a bit over his first 2 years in Washington. So another benefit of there is this is a guy who was drafted 2 years ago. You would have 2 years of club control on a very inexpensive rookie contract, and so look, you gained an extra 6th round pick from Chicago with the Darrell Taylor trade. You're projected to get a 4th and a 5th in compensatory picks next year. Now, though you don't have those right now, you won't actually get those until March, and so you can't trade them when you don't have them. But conceivably, if you're projecting that you're going to get them, that would make you more comfortable, trading one of the late round picks that you currently do have, knowing that the comp picks are going to offset that. So John Ridgeway is the only guy I've heard, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's him or somebody else. I wouldn't be surprised if they add another big body who can play nose tackle.
Yeah, it's interesting if they do make that move, which I think it seems plausible. They just drafted Cameron Young last year. He's on PUP. He's conceivably would be back after 4 weeks. And if you acquire somebody, you're kind of not giving him a spot. So there's a ripple effect, but that's tomorrow's problem. But kind of interesting to see what happens there. Mitch, we're heading towards the season, and we're going to be getting to KP time, and I want to know, do I get any extra credit for calling Darrell Taylor and Mike Jackson trades on our last no table? Do I get any extra bonus
You only
points
get credit for tapping yourself on the back. We'll give you a little bit of credit for that. But I thought what you really were going to say, this is the difference between you and me. You're talking about how you projected that Darrell Taylor would be traded, and accurately so. And Mitch Levy's talking about how isn't it appropriate that 3 days after Darrell Taylor's traded, Uchenna Nwosu goes down with an injury, and we don't know how serious it is. Now, of course, Nwosu plays the game a lot differently, but Darrell Taylor plays the edge. And isn't it interesting that they would lose an edge guy on the second play of the freaking game, the first game after trading Darrell Taylor? That's the difference between passionate pessimist and you, eternal optimist, who's buying tickets on the Seahawks to win the Super Bowl and the NFC.
Yeah, Brady, I don't know about you. I just didn't. I did not get as concerned about the Uchenna Nwosu injury. It looked like a helmet to a knee. It looked like he was able to walk off. They looked at him. They looked him on the sideline, put some ice on it. He eventually went into the locker room walking, not on a cart with staff. I'm not a doctor, but that does not profile to me as a serious injury. It might be a bruise, might be something that keeps him out for a little while, but am I being an unrealistic optimist on that one? Like the Artie Burns one, that was a non-contact injury. He gets carted off the sideline. Yeah. That one to me, I'm like, okay, that might be a season ender. Don't know, but like, what's your read on those two injuries?
Yeah, I remember watching Nwosu, and I also didn't get the sense that that was like a super serious one. Now, again, it's dangerous kind of assessing injuries from the press box. And at the time we're talking right now, I don't think they even know what it is, because he was supposed to get some imaging done today. But yeah, I mean, he sort of lightly jogged off the field. He went into the injury tent, was there for a few minutes, and then came out and was walking around the sideline. He didn't have... whenever guys come out of the injury tent, I kind of look at them with the binoculars to see their facial expressions. I mean, he looked fine, looked like he was having normal conversations with people on the sideline. It was clear he wasn't coming back in as they took his helmet, but then he got his left knee wrapped with ice, which again, that leads me as my non-doctor, analysis to say that maybe that could have just been, he took a helmet to a knee and he's got a bruise there and they're trying to keep the swelling down.
Can we just talk about real quickly the other two injuries, one that you just talked about, Brian, and the other one that happened during camp or during practices, whatever you want to call them, last week, which leaves the passionate pessimist in me very concerned, and that is the Artie Burns injury, the Rayshawn Jenkins injury. I don't know. Watching them on Saturday night, their second team and third team coverage guys, I was not impressed. I'm not super impressed with Kobe Bryant as a safety. I'm worried. I mean, I think I'm confident in Reek Woolen. I know I'm confident in Devin Witherspoon. I'm on the fence about I'm missing somebody.
Julian Love, Trey Brown.
Trey Brown. I'm a little bit on the fence. And then you get to Artie Burns, who now might be hurt. The safeties, I think I'm confident in Julian Love. I think I'm confident in Rayshawn Jenkins, but we don't know the significance of his injury. Now, all of a sudden, with 13 days or 14 days to go till opening day, there's some question marks as we await medical reports on that secondary all of a sudden.
Yeah, and before I give you a chance to answer this one, Brady, just a quick super chat from Detail Oriented that's related. So thank you, Detail. It says, Brian, I personally thought DJ James took a step forward last night. Your thoughts? So, Brady, in that kind of realm of where Mitch is going, I actually was not particularly impressed with either of the Auburn corners throughout training camp and throughout preseason. The team seems to be enamored with Nehemiah Pritchett. All I've seen from Nehemiah Pritchett is him giving up pass after pass, completion after completion. And that's not just in games, it's in practice. So I don't understand necessarily maybe it's just because they drafted him in the 5th round and maybe they feel more invested. If DJ James had to step into a backup nickel position, I don't think he's ready for that. And I don't know who else on the roster really is. If Kobe Bryant would slide back from safety to backup nickel, if they'd ask Trey Brown, So I'm kind of curious, like to Mitch's point, if this Artie Burns injury is real, what does that mean? And the Rayshawn Jenkins injury is a little more clear. Kayvon Wallace would step up. Kobe Bryant's a backup. Ty Okada's behind that. I think the safety position's okay, but Rayshawn Jenkins is a big part of it. So talk about those two guys and what the implications would be.
Yeah, I think Burns that may be a more significant injury situation to monitor than some people realize. But because, we've been out at practice, we've seen Artie Burns in nickel with the number one defense with Devin Witherspoon, still on the left side. So they have seen enough from Artie Burns to think, hey, they're going to put him at nickel and not move Witherspoon inside there. Now, Witherspoon obviously has been at nickel quite a bit, but there appear to be certain packages where Artie Burns is the primary option at nickelback. And so his injury looked like, I was not as, I didn't feel the same way necessarily about his injury than I did about Nwosu's. We saw Burns leave on the back of an injury cart with his left shoe off. And I think that I would say the same thing about Rayshawn Jenkins' injury. He was down for several minutes at practice the other day, ended up, I think he had his left shoe off when he was limping off heavily with assistance from a Seahawks staff member. So those two injuries both had the look of something that actually could be something. Now, we saw Jenkins walk around the field before the game yesterday, and it wasn't on crutches. Didn't look like he was wearing a boot, at least from what I can tell through my binoculars from the press box. But yeah, those are two injury situations to monitor. And, I don't know when we're going to hear any information on those, but I think we will hear from Mike McDonald on Tuesday, I believe. But as we know, those injury information comes out, a lot of times before the head coach makes a comment on it.
Go ahead, Mitch. I see you're poised.
Well, no, I'm just curious. You guys play the role of guys being real close to this and being at practices and being at the facility. I'm obviously not there any longer. I'd be interested in knowing what are the other intriguing storylines to the roster decisions. I'm kind of curious about Helani, whether he would be able to clear waivers and get onto the practice squad, or would somebody snatch him up? Is he going to make the team? What are some of the other storylines that the two of you, obviously in somewhat agreement, except for maybe D. Eskridge, what are the other interesting ones that we should be looking forward to?
Well, I'll start, and Brady jump in here. I actually think running back's a position that always flashes in preseason, is actually usually pretty easy to stash on practice squad. So I've had them keeping 3 running backs this whole time. I think George Helani is a guy that should be on the roster. I think he's a more complete back in a lot of ways than Kenny McIntosh, but Kenny McIntosh has had a fantastic last 2 preseason games. I don't think there's any chance he's not on the roster. So there is a chance they will go with 4 running backs. If they do that, it's going to mean that they're going to have to cut an extra offensive lineman, most likely. And that would be like a guy like Raekwon O'Neal, who I have at the back end of the roster, wouldn't make it. I don't think there's anyone else that I think that they would cut there. And then I think the other piece is them going with, if they go with 6 defensive linemen, assuming that they make a move for Ridgeway or some other backup nose tackle, and that they keep Mike Morris, who, my God, they played him almost the entire game for the last 2 preseason games. I was like, did he some kind of punishment? I don't understand why he was playing so much. But then I think they're going to either have to be short on corner, which is a concern if Artie Burns is injured, or they might take 1 fewer inside linebacker. And that's where I've had a John Radigan, Patrick O'Connell conversation, and John Radigan's due, I think, $3 million non-guaranteed. I don't know why you'd keep him. I don't think there's anything that means like you have to have him, and why not risk losing him and potentially save the money. I also personally think Drake Thomas is a guy that they have some interest in and will be easy for them to put on the practice squad, and is, under club control and could be part of their team for a few more years. So I currently have Patrick O'Connell making it over John Radigan. I think most people have it the other way around. And the last guy I'd kind of bring out is, last 2 guys I'd name, like Ty Okada, I think on the safety spot is like on the bubble and a strong special teams player and could make it. And then Lance Boykin's a guy that I think is a strong special teams player, good corner, made an absolutely silly taunting penalty last night. But really blatantly silly. But but I think is a talented player and has been part of the team for a year or so. And I think that they wouldn't mind finding a way to keep him around, depending on what happens with the injury situation.
Brady, I'm curious on you. I can't believe I just heard Brian even have a question about Mike Morris. Is there really a legitimate question of whether Mike Morris is going to be on this final roster? He seems to me, as just a guy watching the games, as a guy that's clearly shown he deserves a spot on the roster.
I think so too. And he's also, as Brian has made the point, that he's got a kind of unique body type, just very long, very big. So yeah, I think he's on the roster. Now, to your point, whenever you see a guy playing very late into a preseason game like that, you do start to wonder. Yeah. But that could simply be the fact that, look, this guy missed his entire rookie season with a shoulder injury. He needs reps, and they're giving him those reps. So, and he's been banged up a little bit too, so he missed some camp time as well, or some off-season time. So I kind of look at that as they're just giving a young player some reps that he needs. But I think he's on this team now. The linebacker, the inside linebacker question is an interesting one. Brian made the point about John Radigan's salary, $2.985 million. It's a big number for a guy who projects as a backup at a position where you're not rotating. It's not like outside linebacker. Remember, Darrell Taylor, they traded him in large part because they didn't want to pay him $3.12 million to have a very situational role as an edge rusher. Well, Darrell Taylor would have played more on defense than John Radigan is slated to play on defense at inside linebacker. So if they didn't want to pay Darrell Taylor that, I don't think they're going to want to pay John Radigan the same amount or roughly the same amount. He obviously is a great special teams player, but Taylor also played on special teams. And so I think something's got to give with Radigan and that salary. And if he's on this team for just under $3 million, that would be very surprising to me. I wonder if there's maybe a pay cut situation there or something. And then the other,
hold on, Brady, are we 100% that Jerome Baker is going to play on December 8th? I'm sorry, September 8th?
Not 100%. No, not 100%, but
and definitely not 100% of the full game either.
Right.
And if he doesn't play, who does?
You'd have Tyrese Knight. You would still have Terrell Dotson at Mike linebacker, and then you would put Tyrese Knight there. Well, I mean, yeah, Tyrese Knight has been at that spot way more than we've seen Radigan working with the number one defense.
Right. But I know we're running short here. We're actually running long, which is giving us only a short amount of time left. Brady, there is a name that for me is near and dear to my heart. He's my preseason favorite. His name's Jamie Sheriff, and the person inside the press box kept calling him Sharif for the first 5 or so times. But he made so many plays, the guy had to actually learn how to pronounce his name. And
he issued a heartfelt apology for
mispronouncing.
It was my apologies.
Great. Yes, but this guy can't. I don't think I've seen a story like this where he comes in so late to camp. It absolutely blows up in the first preseason game. Shows up in every 1v1, unlike Boye Mafe, by the way. Mm-hmm. Every 1v1, Sharif is winning 1v1s. Game 2, sack, more pressures. Game 3, 2 sacks. Should have had 4 quarterback hits if not for roughing the passer. And then you have Mike McDonald. I want you to parse, chest your parsing of Mike McDonald at the end. I asked him about hey, how is it hard to, make these cuts after all this? And he's like, one of the comments he made was like Jamie Sharif, we hope that those guys know and come back to us and that we're invested in their future, which to me sounded like they're planning to cut this guy and hope that they get him on the practice squad. 1, is that your read? And 2, do you think that he's played himself out of a practice squad spot for the Seahawks?
Boy, that would be a huge jump as a guy who, remember, this wasn't a guy that they signed as an undrafted free agent, right after the draft. He was a guy who took part in their rookie minicamp as a tryout player, and then they didn't even bring him back until early August, I think it was. So a week or so into training camp, and then he just has been popping since then. So that would be quite the story if he made the 53-man roster. Now, if there's something up with Uchenna Nwosu's knee, that would certainly change the equation there, and maybe I could see that. But yeah, based on what McDonald was saying there, that sounded like a guy that they're going to waive, figure he doesn't get claimed, and then hope that he can that he'll re-sign to their practice squad for sure.
Well, Mitch, I guess I make myself feel a little bit more comfortable if that's the way what they do. That I remember Nick Reed, I remember Cason Williams,
Tremaine Pope.
Troymaine Pope. I remember the preseason heroes.
Oh God, who was
But
the
it would be
running back?
tough.
The little running back that ended up in
That's
Carolina.
Troymaine Pope.
Oh, Tremaine Pope. Okay. All right.
Yes. So, Mitch, last kind of questions. We're kind of wrapping here. I am curious, kind of gestalt, high level, as this.
I know nothing. Go ahead.
As we kind of wrap on the preseason,
Yeah.
have your expectations for the Seahawks increased since before the preseason began? Have they decreased? Where are they relative to end of last year? Like, where's the arrow pointing for Mitch Levy on this team, and how high or low is it?
It's a great question. I do a podcast each week on Unfiltered. I'll ring the bell with Danny O'Neill. You guys know Danny. And I asked him a version of the question you just asked me, which is, it's natural for an NFL fan, for any fan of any sport, as opening day approaches, there's just this natural optimism. And it's hard for me to filter out one versus, is it just natural optimism that we all get excited for opening day when our team is 0-0 and getting ready and we have just this natural enthusiasm? Or is there legit, is it real and spectacular? Is the enthusiasm real, or is it just what we do as fans? We find a way to get excited. Like a lot of the stuff when I watch Hawkblogger Mornings, I'm going to just be honest. I feel like there's a lot of, okay, we're getting close. We're getting excited. I'm not saying, you know as much about the team as anybody, Brian, but I feel that as a passionate pessimist coming through my screen when I watch you and all the guys talk about how the 49ers are not having a good camp. There's something going on over there. Something's rotten in Denmark. Yep. We're surging over here. Maybe they can win the division. There's a lot of that going on. So I don't know the answer to the question. I think what complicates it for me is Mike Macdonald and the impact that he will have on the defense. I think that is the core of my – if I've changed since last year, you just asked me since the back of last year. If I've changed, I would say it's because I'm really curious to see the impact that Mike Macdonald has on this defensive football team. Pass rush, coverage, disguising blitzes, guys coming from all different. I'm super curious about that. So I would say I'm modestly more excited than I was at the end of last year. But I find so many question marks. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The offensive line has not answered any of my questions, but either negatively or positively. They just haven't answered any of my questions. I'm super worried at middle linebacker, or inside linebacker, as the case is, and I wonder about the safeties a little bit. So that's where I stand. I'm eager. I'm excited. I'm anticipating the season, but I don't know that I am markedly in a different place on the Seahawks as I was at the end of the year.
All right, Brady, same basic question to you as a non-fan, our objective observer. What's your assessment? Is your assessment changed of this team now versus when camp started?
A little bit, just because we've seen how good the defense could be. We've got some glimpses of it, albeit in preseason games against teams that aren't starting, their number one offense. But there have just been some glimpses there. I think that the other thing that concerns me, and again, not concerned from a fan perspective, but meaning if I were them, what might concern me about their ability to start fast is, remember, new schemes on both sides of the ball. That's a huge undertaking to do that on one side of the ball, let alone on two. And I just wonder if it's hard to tell if they are at a place installation wise where they feel like they would ideally be exactly 2 weeks before the start of the regular season. again, it's a big undertaking, and you just see them in practice, and it sometimes get the impression that maybe they aren't as far along. That's just me taking a guess, observing from the sideline, but you just see them, kind of want to. You see Mike McDonald, doing the finger motion. Nope, do it again, do it again.
Right.
And so I don't know. That just makes me wonder if maybe it might take a little bit for them to really get their footing, knowing that they're installing schemes on both sides of the ball.
One other nuance to this conversation, Brian, and I think you might even agree with this, and that is the opponent week 1 and where the game is. We hardly talk about that. I mean, they got the Denver Broncos here, a poor team by all accounts last year, a team that's going to start a rookie quarterback in his first game on the road here in Seattle against Mike McDonald's defense. For me, I hate to say it, but it's almost a must-win for the Seattle Seahawks. Not obviously for playoffs if the season ended today and it doesn't. But you almost look at that game and say, how do the Seahawks lose that game? How are we encouraged coming out of week 1 at home against an undermanned Broncos team with a rookie quarterback making his first start? How do they not win that game? They almost have to win that game to preserve any enthusiasm that any of us have. Do you not agree with that?
I would go a step further, Mitch. So I think the first 2 weeks, first 2 weeks fall into that category. I think New England is an even worse team.
How about the third?
We'll talk about that when we get there. But to answer your question, which I hate your question, by the way, I love you, but I hate your question about how do they lose this game? I don't want to think about it, but the way that they lose this game, it's very similar to the first game that they had at home last year against a Rams team who at that time, everybody thought was hopelessly rebuilding, had a terrible defense. And the Seahawks were barely winning at halftime, and they lose both tackles, and then they get blown out at home.
But I wasn't asking how do they lose it from a literal sense. I understand.
I understand. My point, though,
a million ways. They could lose it a million different ways. We can close our eyes and see it. What I'm saying is, how do they lose? And I wasn't articulating it. How do they lose the Broncos game? And any of us feel good about the season and the direction when it's a home game against the Broncos and Bo Nix? How do they lose that game and keep our hope, keep our enthusiasm?
It would be rough, and this is where I am on it. I already see in Mike McDonald a bar that he's holding for his team, and I see him making adjustments and the team actually adjusting to his adjustments in training camp, between practices. And so my confidence that this coaching staff have their hands on the knobs and twiddles necessary to eventually get this team where they want it to be is just higher. I think it's a higher quality level of coaching staff, 1 through N, than the Seahawks have had for some time. You heard last night, even the running backs talking about how much Kennedy Palomalu's already impacted them. Like everybody on this staff, I think is a high level coach for the thing that they're doing. So yes, it would be a very big gut punch for a lot of people. It'd be like, here we go again.
Yes.
I don't think they're going to lose that game. So spoiler alert there, but if they were, I think the coaching staff would get to work. And I think that you'd maybe have to hope that they start winning some games in the back half of the year that currently we'd all say that's probably an L. This is, guys, I want to make sure we get you out of here because we've gone a little long, which I want to do. I am a talkative guy. I really appreciate it. I do want to say thank you to Rick R., who has gifted 10 memberships to the channel during the show. It's incredibly generous. You do this. I know that some of the folks that have been coming on trying to get these free memberships, and then Detail Oriented, thank you again as well. Another 10 memberships gifted. And so really appreciate it. If folks have not already given the show a like and click subscribe, please do. Then make sure you go over to Mitch Unfiltered and subscribe there.
Gonna be a good show.
It's a great show and a great guest. Who's coming up on that show besides this No Table?
So we'll have a condensed version for anybody who didn't hear this whole thing and didn't hear Brady proclaim that he's not a fan a couple of times. We'll have this. We'll have the Mariners. We do a Mariners No Table. where we'll talk about all of the soap opera around that team this past week. And Steve Phillips, the former GM of the Mets, who's a longtime buddy of mine. He's on Sirius XM and does the MLB Network. He's got a lot to say about what the Mariners did with Dan Wilson and Scott Service and what's coming with Jerry DiPoto in the offseason. He's got plenty to say from a national perspective about the Mariners. So we're going to do all that in a show that actually is released tomorrow, episode 301 of Mitch Unfiltered. Brady?
There we go. Thank you.
Brady, ESPN.com. What's coming up for you? You doing any radio stuff this week? You got more articles coming out? What should people be looking forward to?
Yeah, I'll be all over, as I know you will as well, the cuts on Tuesday and trying to track as many of those and get ahead of as many of those as I can. I think I'm going to co-host, I'm going to fill in on Seattle Sports, 7:10 a.m. With Dave Wyman on Monday afternoon. And then I think we are going to hear from John Schneider on Wednesday from the VMAC. So that's with the local media, not the radio station, I mean. So maybe something to come from that, but yeah, it'll be a busy week as it always is on around cut down day. And then, sort of gearing up for the regular season after that.
Fellas, thank you to JJ for another gifted membership. Appreciate it. This is another Seahawks No Table found regularly on Mitch Unfiltered. Make sure you go over there to follow and listen. Thank you both. It was great to see you, Mitch Levy. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you,
Brady Henderson of ESPN.com. Thank you.
Thanks, Brian.
All right. Take care, everybody.